The morning everything changed. I was standing in my daughter's kitchen, holding a pot of gumbo I had cooked the night before, sealed in a Tupperware container I'd bought specifically for travel, packed carefully between 2 ice packs in a bag I'd carried through 2 airports and 1 layover in Charlotte. Renee looked at me from across the kitchen island. She didn't say thank you. She didn't say Mom. What a surprise. She looked at me the way you look at weather you didn't check the forecast for. Not angry, not happy. Just tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Then she turned around and walked into her bedroom and closed the door. And I stood there, 64 years old, with my gumbo and my ice packs, and I didn't know what to do with my hands. But I need to back up, because that moment in Renee's kitchen, that's not where this story starts. It starts 30 years earlier, in a different kitchen, in a different city, with me on the other side of that door. I was 34. My mother Dorothy had shown up at my apartment in Atlanta without calling. She'd taken the bus from Decatur, let herself in with the spare key I'd given her for emergencies, and by the time I got home from work, she had rearranged my living room furniture, thrown out 3 things from my refrigerator she deemed expired, and was in the middle of telling me which curtains I should replace. I said, "Mom, this is my apartment, not yours." She picked up her purse, didn't say a word, walked to the door, and before she left, she turned and looked at me with an expression I couldn't name then. I can name it now. It was grief. She left. I stood in my rearranged living room feeling righteous and exhausted. I thought, I am nothing like her. I would never do that to my child. I was so sure. Here is what I know now at 64, having lived long enough to watch myself become the very thing I swore against. The things we inherit don't announce themselves. They don't come with labels. They arrive wrapped in love, disguised as caring, dressed up as I only want what's best for you. And by the time you recognize them, you've already handed them down. My name is Yvonne. I am 64 years old. I have 1 daughter named Renee, 1 son-in-law named David, and 1 granddaughter named Jasmine, who is 9 years old and whose favorite color, I only just learned this, is bright orange. I didn't know that. I had never asked. This is the story of 3 women, 4 generations of silence, and the one conversation that was 38 years overdue. This is the story of the morning I finally stopped talking long enough to hear what my daughter had been trying to tell me her whole life. And this, I hope, is the story of where the cycle ends. Celestine. My grandmother Celestine was born in 1918 in Greenwood, Mississippi, and she survived things that I will never fully understand because she never talked about them. That was the first inheritance. The silence. She was 3 years old during the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921. Her family wasn't in Tulsa. They were in Greenwood, Mississippi, a different Greenwood. But the news traveled, the way terrible news always traveled through Black communities in those years, carried in low voices and worried eyes, reshaping everything it touched. She grew up knowing the world could take everything from you without warning. She grew up knowing that the safest thing a Black woman could be was useful and unnoticed and prepared. She moved to Jackson when she was 19 and spent the next 31 years cleaning the house of a white family on Fortification Street. She arrived at 7 in the morning and left at 5 in the evening, 5 days a week, and she never once told my mother what that felt like. Not one word. What she did instead, she came home and cooked. She cleaned her own house, which was smaller and less grand than the one she'd spent her day in, but which was hers, with the same care and precision. She made sure every child was fed, bathed, and in bed by 8:30. She checked homework without praise, corrected mistakes without cruelty, and went to bed without complaint. She loved her children the way a levee loves a river. Completely, silently, and by holding everything back. My mother Dorothy told me once, just once, late at night when she'd had a small glass of bourbon and her guard came down for exactly 4 minutes, that Celestine had never once said I love you to her children. Not because she didn't love them, but because in Celestine's world, love was not a sentence. Love was the fact that there was food on the table. Love was the ironed school uniform. Love was the way she stood in the back of the school auditorium at every single one of Dorothy's performances and never told Dorothy she'd been there, because drawing attention to herself felt dangerous, in a way that 30 years of distance has still not fully erased. A strong Black woman doesn't need comfort, Celestine told Dorothy once. She gives it. Dorothy heard that and turned it into a life philosophy. And then she handed it to me. My mother was born in 1940 in Atlanta, Georgia, and she was the most capable woman I have ever known. I say that without reservation and without irony. Dorothy could do everything. Fix a leaky faucet, balance a checkbook to the penny, make a dress from a pattern she'd drawn herself, talk a landlord down $20 on rent through sheer force of dignity. She worked 2 jobs for most of my childhood. Days as a seamstress at a dry cleaning shop on Auburn Avenue, evenings 3 nights a week as a cashier at a grocery store in Vine City. She was home for dinner every night I can remember. I don't know how she managed that. I never asked. She came to every school play, every choir concert, every parent-teacher conference. She sat in the 3rd row, always, with her good coat on and her handbag on her lap, and she never embarrassed me by cheering too loud or crying in public. After the performances, walking home, she would say, "You did well. Now tell me what you'd do differently next time." She never said "I'm proud of you," not once that I can remember. The year I was accepted to Spelman College, I ran home with the letter in my hands, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. Dorothy was in the kitchen. I held the letter out. She took it, read it carefully, set it on the counter, and turned back to the stove. "Go wash up," she said. "I'm making your favorite." That night she made smothered pork chops and cornbread and sweet potato pie. She had clearly planned it. The sweet potatoes had been soaking since morning. She knew I was going to get in. She believed in me before I believed in myself, but she could not say it out loud. That was not a tool she had been given. What she had instead, criticism dressed as preparation. "Don't wear that to your interview. What will they think?" Comparison dressed as motivation. "Your cousin Patricia made Dean's List again. Did you see?" Control dressed as love. When I was 22 and had just moved into my first apartment, Dorothy arrived one Saturday with a box of cleaning supplies, a shower curtain she'd bought without asking, and strong opinions about where my couch should go. She was not trying to hurt me. She was Celestine's daughter. She loved me the only way she had ever been taught. And I swore, standing in that rearranged living room at 34, watching her walk out the door, that I would be different. I said it like it was a choice, like inheritance was something you could simply refuse. I was wrong about that. God, I was wrong about that. Renee was born in 1986, and from the moment she arrived, I poured everything I had into doing this differently. I said I love you every single day, multiple times a day. I hugged her in public. I went to every school event and cheered too loud on purpose, because I had decided that embarrassing your child with love was better than leaving them wondering. I was warm where Dorothy had been cool. I was present where Celestine had been silent. I was so proud of myself for this. What I did not understand, what took me 64 years and one closed door and one 9-year-old asking me a question I couldn't answer, was that love is not just warmth. Love is also space. And I had never learned to leave space. When Renee was 16 and wanted to repaint her bedroom, I drove us to Home Depot. I had already decided on the color before we left the house. Yellow, warm and cheerful, practical, good resale value if we ever moved, I told myself. I held up the swatches and said, "This one, right? This is perfect." And Renee looked at the yellow swatch, then at a navy blue one she'd been holding, and said, "Sure, Mom." She wanted navy blue. She had wanted it her whole life. I found out 30 years later, in an email sent at 1 a.m. from a hotel in Seattle, when Renee was accepted to Georgia Tech, her first choice, a school she had researched herself, quietly, without telling me because she'd learned already that telling me things meant I would take them over. I had already prepared a list of 7 schools I thought were better options. I presented the list at dinner. I had printed it. I had included rankings and average starting salaries and proximity to family. Renee looked at the list, said, "I'll think about it." Went to Georgia Tech anyway, which was the right decision, but spent the first semester wondering why she felt guilty about it. When Renee got engaged to David at 29, she called me from Denver where they'd been hiking. He'd proposed on a trail at sunrise, she said, and her voice had that particular sound that a mother recognizes, the sound of a person who is completely, unexpectedly, perfectly happy. I listened. I said, "Baby, that is wonderful." And then I said, "Now, let's talk about the venue." I was thinking spring, and I already have a call into the florist your Aunt Gloria used for her daughters. Renee got quiet. I thought she was overwhelmed. She was, in fact, but not the way I thought. She has 200 wedding photographs. She loves 3 of them. She told me this in the email, and that sentence has not left me since I read it. 200 photographs of the most important day of her life, and she loves 3. I did not see it happening. That is the truth I have had to learn to sit with. I was not malicious. I was not careless. I was the opposite of careless. I was relentless in my care. So relentless that I left no room for anything that wasn't mine. And the worst part, the part that kept me awake that night in the Atlanta hotel room, was Jasmine. Jasmine, who was 9 years old, who had learned to look at me and say, "Yes, Grandma," before I had even finished asking the question. Jasmine, who David had watched one afternoon at the kitchen table, drawing a picture with her crayons, and who had looked up when she heard Yvonne's car pull into the driveway and quietly, automatically, switched from the bright orange crayon she'd been using to a red one, because she'd learned that Grandma liked red, and Grandma would say something about it if she was using orange. My 9-year-old granddaughter had learned to manage me. David noticed. He mentioned it to Renee, and Renee had gone quiet for a long moment before she said, "That's what I did too." 3 generations of women learning to make themselves smaller to fill the space of one. Celestine, who was made small by the world and learned to make herself invisible. Dorothy, who swore she would be strong and became someone who could not hear, "I need something different from you," without hearing, "You have failed." Me, Yvonne, who swore I would be warm and became someone who loved her daughter by taking up every inch of available room. And Renee, who loved me, who had never doubted that I loved her, but who had spent 38 years learning how to breathe around me rather than with me. There is a particular kind of family wound that doesn't leave marks. It doesn't come from cruelty. It doesn't come from absence or addiction or violence or any of the things we have names for, the things therapists and books have covered so thoroughly that you can recognize them, diagnose them, hold them up to the light and say, "That is what happened to me." This kind of wound is harder to name because it comes wrapped in the very best intentions. It comes from someone who shows up, who works hard, who is present at every concert and every graduation and every difficult moment with a casserole dish and a plan. It comes from someone who loves you so much that they forget to leave room for the question, "What do you actually want?" My friend Gloria named it for me before I was ready to hear it. We were having coffee at her kitchen table in East Point. We've been doing this every other Thursday for 30 years, a ritual so old and steady it's practically load-bearing. And I was telling her about my plan to fly out to Seattle and surprise Renee. I had it all worked out. I'd found a good fare. I'd already made the gumbo. I was going to help her repaint the guest room. I'd seen on a video call that the color was looking tired, and I had ideas about the garden. Gloria put her mug down. "Yvonne," she said, not unkindly, but with that particular tone she uses when she's about to say something I don't want to hear. "Did Renee ask you to come?" "She doesn't have to ask. She's my daughter." "That's not an answer. She'd want me there if she knew I was coming." "How do you know?" I opened my mouth, closed it. "You do this," Gloria said. She wasn't angry. She looked, if anything, a little sad. "You fill every room, Yvonne. You walk into a space and you arrange it. You decide what it needs. And you do it out of love. I know that. Everyone who knows you knows that. But sometimes a room that's already been filled doesn't need more furniture. Sometimes it just needs you to sit in it quietly." I drove home without finishing my coffee. I didn't call Gloria back for 4 days, but her words stayed. They stayed because I had been hearing echoes of them for months. Not from Gloria, but from smaller moments that I had been filing away under Renee as just busy, and she's a working mother, she's tired, and this is just what happens when your children grow up. The Sunday phone calls. Every Sunday at 7 p.m., Renee called. Always. She had not missed a Sunday in 11 years. I had always taken this as evidence of our closeness, proof that despite the distance, she in Seattle, me in Atlanta, we were still tightly bound. What I had not let myself examine too closely was the calls themselves. 23 minutes, nearly every call. I started noticing the timing without meaning to, the way you notice a clock ticking once you've been told it makes noise. 23 minutes, almost exactly. And in those 23 minutes, the weather, the broad strokes of Jasmine's school week, a general status update on David's job, a surface-level summary of Renee's own work. Nothing underneath any of it. No, I've been struggling with this. No. Can I tell you something that scared me? No, Mom. I need to think out loud for a minute. Just the weather and the school week and the surface. I had told myself, she's private. She's always been that way. But sitting with Gloria's words rolling around in my head, I started to ask a different question. What if she isn't private? What if she just learned, somewhere along the way, that there was no room in our conversations for the underneath parts? What if she'd tried, once or twice or 10 times, and I had responded to "I'm struggling with something" with a list of solutions before she'd finished her sentence? Not because I didn't care, but because caring, for me, had always meant doing rather than hearing. I thought about the last time Renee had told me something that frightened her. I could not remember a single instance. That realization sat on my chest for 2 days. Then I booked the flight to Seattle. And you know how that went. I stood in the hallway of Renee's house with my gumbo and my travel bag and the guest room paint ideas I hadn't been asked for, and David opened the door and looked at me with an expression that I recognized, though I'd never seen it on his face before. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't unhappy to see me exactly. But there was something careful in his eyes, something pre-braced, the expression of a man who has had this particular conversation with his wife and knows what is about to happen and is already sorry about all of it. "Yvonne," he said, I wanted to surprise you all. I made gumbo." Yeah, come in." Renee was in the kitchen. She turned when she heard my voice, and I watched her face move through something too fast for me to catch all of it. Surprise, and something underneath the surprise that I didn't want to name. She said, "Mom, what are you doing here?" "I wanted to see my girls. Is that so terrible?" She looked at me for a long moment. Then she looked at the Tupperware container in my hands. Then she looked at something over my shoulder that wasn't there. And then she walked into her bedroom and closed the door. Not slammed. That might have been easier. She closed it the way you close a door when you've been closing it for a long time and you've gotten very, very tired of having to do it. David and I stood in the hallway. "I'll make some coffee," he said quietly. I set the gumbo on the counter. I stood in my daughter's kitchen, in a house I had visited 6 times in 4 years, and I looked at the cabinet handles, brushed brass, very tasteful, not what I would have chosen, and I thought about the guest room paint color, the one I'd seen looking tired on the video call, the Benjamin Moore sample I had in my purse. And then I thought about what Gloria had said. Sometimes it just needs you to sit in it quietly. I sat down at the kitchen table. For once in my life, I did not move a single thing. Jasmine found me at 7:30 the next morning. I had spent the night at a Marriott 4 blocks from Renee's house, a detail that still lands strangely when I say it out loud. 4 blocks from my daughter's home, in a hotel room with a view of a parking garage, eating vending machine peanut butter crackers, and watching a channel I wasn't following because the silence was too loud to sit in alone. David had called at 9 the previous evening, after I'd taken a cab to the hotel without telling anyone I was leaving. He didn't ask where I was. He just said, "She knows you're safe. She needs tonight." Then, "She doesn't hate you, Yvonne. I want you to know that." I thanked him. I said I was fine. I ate my crackers. At 7:15 the next morning, my phone showed a text from David. "Jasmine wants to bring you breakfast. Okay if I walk her over?" I was already dressed. I had been dressed since 5:30. "Please," I wrote back. She came through the hotel room door, carrying a paper bag from the bakery 2 streets over, a blueberry muffin, and a small container of orange juice. Things a 9-year-old selects when she has been given $5 and told to pick something Grandma would like. She was wearing a purple jacket over her pajama top, her locks pulled back unevenly, one side higher than the other, the way they look when she's done them herself. She climbed onto the bed beside me without asking and opened the muffin bag and held it out like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like we did this every Saturday. Like there was nothing at all unusual about finding your grandmother in a hotel room 4 blocks from your house. "Grandma, why does Mommy cry after she talks to you sometimes?" The question arrived the way a child's questions always arrive. Without warning, without cushioning, from the completely clear and uncluttered place where children still live before they learn to protect people from what they actually think. I looked at my granddaughter. She was looking back at me with eyes that were her great-grandfather Robert's eyes, dark and direct and patient, in a way that is rare in a 9-year-old. And she was waiting for an answer with the calm confidence of someone who genuinely believes that adults, when asked sincerely, will tell the truth. I had been asked harder questions in my life. I could not think of one at that moment. "I don't know, baby," I said, and for the first time in a long time, that was the honest answer. David walked her back at 9. I sat in the hotel room for another 30 minutes, turning the empty muffin bag over in my hands, listening to the parking garage sounds outside my window. Engines, A cart with a squeaky wheel, someone's car alarm going off twice and then stopping. Why does Mommy cry after she talks to you? Not during, after. Renee waited until the call was over to cry. She held it together for 23 minutes and then, somewhere between hanging up and, what? Putting the phone down, walking to the kitchen, standing over the sink, she cried. How long had this been happening? How many Sunday evenings had I hung up feeling satisfied? Good talk? We're close, we're fine. While 3,200 miles away, my daughter stood somewhere in her house and cried, and I had no idea. I picked up my phone, put it down, picked it up again, called Gloria. She closed the door, I said when Gloria picked up. Renee. I showed up and she closed the door. Gloria was quiet for a moment, not surprised. That was the thing about Gloria. She was almost never surprised by the consequences of things she had already warned me about. What did you do before you knocked? I got on a plane. Did she ask you to come? There it was again. That question. The same one from Thursday coffee, wearing different clothes. No, I said. The word felt strange in my mouth, small, like admitting something I'd been avoiding for a long time. Yvonne. Gloria's voice was gentle in the way that is harder to receive than anger. What are you going to do? I looked at the parking garage, at the muffin bag, at the Benjamin Moore paint sample still sitting in my purse, a color called Quiet Moments, in a pale sage green that I had picked out for Renee's guest room without once asking Renee what color she might want her own guest room to be. I think I need to ask her something, I said. And then I think I need to be quiet. That's the hardest thing you've ever tried to do, Gloria said. I know. I'll be here when you get back. I walked to Renee's house at 10:15. No gumbo, no paint samples, nothing in my hands at all, which felt strange. I am a woman who is always carrying something, always arriving with something, always making sure that my presence comes with a practical justification. Just me. Coat, keys, hands empty. David answered the door. He looked at my hands. I saw him do it, the quick involuntary check. And something in his shoulders settled. She's in the backyard, he said. Renee was sitting on the back steps with a mug of coffee, looking at the garden. It was a gray Seattle morning, the particular gray that isn't threatening, just settled, like the sky has made its decision and is comfortable with it. The garden was going dormant for the season. The raised beds mulched over, the roses cut back, one ornamental grass still doing something interesting in the far corner. She heard me open the sliding door and didn't turn around. I sat down beside her on the step, not across from her, not standing over her. Beside her, on the same step, close enough that our shoulders were almost touching. We sat there for a while. I don't know exactly how long. Long enough for a bird to land on the fence, consider the garden, and leave. I'm not here to explain myself, I said finally. I'm not here to tell you why I came or what I was thinking or what my intentions were. Renee turned her mug in her hands but didn't say anything. I want to ask you something. One thing. And I promise I'm going to try something I'm not very good at, which is just listening to the answer. She turned to look at me then. There was something in her face that I recognized from when she was small. A careful, watchful expression. The look of a child who has learned not to hope for a specific thing because hoping and then not getting it is worse than not hoping at all. My heart did something complicated. What? She said. What did I do? Tell me. All of it. I'm not going to defend myself. I'm not going to explain. I just want to know. The silence that followed was the longest of my life, and I mean that without exaggeration. I am 64 years old, and I have sat through silences at hospital bedsides and across divorce lawyers' desks and at gravesides in January, and none of them felt as long as those 30 seconds on the back steps while my daughter decided whether or not to believe me. Mom, she said finally, every time I've tried to tell you something like this, it turns into a conversation about why you did what you did, and I end up comforting you about it. I know. I can't do that again. I know. I put my hands in my lap. I'm not asking you to do it in person if that's too hard, but I need to hear it, however you need to say it. She looked at me for a long time. I'll think about it, she said. That was all. I stood up, said goodbye to David and Jasmine, took a cab back to the hotel, and booked the earliest available flight home for the next morning. I did not offer to stay. I did not suggest we have dinner. I did not leave the paint sample anywhere in the house. I packed my bag and I waited. The email came at 1:07 in the morning, Seattle time, which meant it was 4:07 in Atlanta, where I was lying awake in my own bed having arrived home 6 hours earlier, staring at the ceiling with the specific alertness of someone whose body is exhausted and whose mind has decided that sleep is simply not on the agenda. My phone lit up on the nightstand. From Renee Morrison, subject no subject. I sat up. The email was 6 pages long. I know this because when I forwarded it to myself the next morning to print it out, it came to 6 pages in 12-point font. I didn't know that at 4 a.m. on a Tuesday. At 4 a.m. on a Tuesday, I just started reading, in the blue-white light of my phone screen, sitting on the edge of my bed in the dark. She did not start with the big things. That was what undid me first. That she started small. That after 38 years of things she'd never said, she opened with something that happened when she was 18 years old and had just moved into her dorm room at Georgia Tech. Mom, you helped me move in. You drove the minivan. You carried boxes. You stayed all day, and I was grateful for that. I want you to know I was grateful. But at some point while I was at orientation, you rearranged everything. When I came back, my desk was against the other wall. The rug I'd picked out was rolled up in the closet because you'd brought a different one, and the photos I'd tacked up above my bed had been taken down and replaced with the framed prints you'd brought from home. I went to the bathroom and I cried. I was 18 and it was my first night away from home, and I was homesick and scared and excited all at the same time. And I came back to my room, and it wasn't my room anymore. It was a room you had made for me. And I couldn't say anything because you had worked so hard and driven so far, and I didn't want to hurt you. I want you to know, I have never once regretted going to Georgia Tech. It was the right choice. But my first night there, I cried in a bathroom stall, and I never told you. I've never told you a lot of things. I read that paragraph 3 times before I could move on. I kept trying to remember that day. I remember the drive. Renee in the passenger seat, anxious and excited, playing the same 3 songs on repeat. I remember the boxes. I remember thinking the room was small and not saying so. I remember bringing the framed prints because the room needed something on the walls, and the photos she'd brought were just snapshots. Not framed, not neat. I remember thinking, she'll thank me for this. She cried in a bathroom stall instead. I kept reading. When I got married, you told the photographer which shots you wanted. You had a list. Mom, you had a printed list for the photographer at my wedding. I have 200 photographs. I love 3 of them. The 3 are the ones David took on his phone when no one was looking. When Jasmine was born and you came to stay, I know you came because you wanted to help. And you did help. You cooked and you cleaned and you were there at 3 in the morning when I didn't know what I was doing. Nay, but you stayed for 10 days and you never once asked David and me if 10 days was what we needed. You decided it was. David slept on the couch for a week in his own home because the guest room was yours. He never said anything because he knew it would upset me. I never said anything because I didn't know how to tell you to leave without it turning into a conversation about everything you'd done for us. I love you. I need you to know that. What I'm writing isn't the opposite of love, but sometimes I think you love the version of me you built more than the one I actually am. She wrote about the piano lessons, the ones she'd taken from age 8 to 16, the ones I had signed her up for because I had always wished I had learned piano and had decided without asking that this was something Renee would want too. I didn't hate piano, Mom. I want to be clear about that. But I didn't love it either. I quit at 16 not because I wasn't good at it, but because it was the one thing in my life that was entirely yours. Your idea, your choice, your pride. And quitting it was the only way I could find to have something that was entirely mine. I chose architecture for the same reason. You didn't know enough about it to have opinions. That's not the only reason. I love what I do. I've always loved it. But I'd be lying if I said it wasn't part of it. She wrote about the Sunday calls. 23 minutes. I know you've noticed. I've noticed you noticing. I keep them at 23 minutes because that's long enough to cover the surface things and short enough that we don't get to the underneath things. I do this on purpose. I'm not proud of it. But every time I've tried to tell you something real, something I was scared about or confused about or struggling with, you started solving it before I finished the sentence. And after a while, I stopped trying to say the real things. It was easier. I hate that it was easier. She wrote about Jasmine. Jasmine has learned to tell you what you want to hear. She figured this out at around age 7. I watched it happen and I didn't stop it, and I've been sitting with the guilt of that for 2 years. She switches her crayons when she hears your car. Did you know that? She was using her favorite color, and she switched it because she'd learned that you'd comment on it if it wasn't a color you liked. Mom, she's 9. She's already learned to manage the adults around her. She learned it from watching me. And I learned it from being your daughter. I'm not telling you this to hurt you. I want you to understand that. I've spent my whole life trying not to hurt you, and I'm tired. Not of you, but of that. Of the management of it. I'm writing this because you asked. And because Dr. Owens says the people who ask are worth answering. The email ended simply, without drama, without a demand. I love you. I'm not going anywhere. I just needed you to know. Renee, my first instinct, and I am telling you this because I think it is important to be honest about it. My first instinct was to call her, not to listen, to explain. Baby, I rearranged that dorm room because the photographer's list was because I wanted you to have. The 10 days after Jasmine was born, I had a reason for every single thing she'd named. Good reasons, I thought. Loving reasons. Reasons that would, if I explained them correctly, make her understand that I had not been taking up space. I had been filling it, carefully, with good intentions and hard work and 38 years of genuine love. I had the phone in my hand. And then I thought about Dorothy, who always had a reason. Dorothy, who could explain every single choice she had ever made in terms of love and sacrifice and wanting the best for her children. Dorothy, who was never wrong, who was never the problem, who was always only trying to help, and who I had kept at arm's length for the last 6 years of her life because I could not have one conversation with her where I felt heard. I set the phone down. I got up, went to the kitchen, made tea I didn't drink, came back to the bedroom. I found a notepad in my nightstand, one of the small ones I keep for grocery lists and things I don't want to forget. And I sat on the edge of the bed and I wrote at the top of the first page, what Renee needed from me that I didn't give. I wrote until the sky started changing outside my window. By the time the birds started, I had filled 11 pages. Somewhere around page 7, something shifted. I had been writing in a kind of deliberate, clinical way. Line item, specific incident, what she said, what I should have done differently. The way I approach most problems, with organization and intention, and a plan. And then I wrote, she quit piano to have something that was hers. And I stopped. Because I remembered Celestine. Not Celestine as a story, not Celestine as family history. I had those things already. I'd carried them my whole life. I remembered her in the body, in the place in your chest where you keep the people who shaped you before you had language for what shaping was. Celestine, who had spent 31 years making another family's home beautiful while her own children waited. Celestine, who loved by controlling the controllable things, the ironed uniforms, the 8:30 bedtime, because the world had taken her controllable things and burned them down when she was 3 years old. Celestine, who gave Dorothy a strong woman, doesn't need comfort because comfort was not something anyone had ever offered Celestine, and she had survived anyway, hadn't she? She had survived. That had to be enough. That had to be the lesson. Dorothy, who had taken doesn't need comfort and turned it into doesn't ask for it, doesn't offer it, keeps moving, keeps working, keeps doing. Me, who had seen Dorothy's coldness and decided the opposite. Warmth, presence, closeness, without understanding that you can be warm and still take up too much room. That you can be present and still not be listening. That love can be sincere and still be about yourself. I sat on my bed at 5 a.m. and I thought, we were all doing the same thing. Every one of us. We were all loving our daughters as hard as we could with the tools we had been given. And the tools were broken. And we passed them down, generation to generation, each of us convinced we were doing better than the one before, each of us leaving a different shape of the same wound. Celestine's wound. I was never allowed to take up space, so I will fill yours. Dorothy's wound. Comfort is weakness, so I will raise you strong and call it love. Mine. I will be so present, so warm, so there. I will love you so loudly and so completely that you will never once doubt you are loved. And Renee, inheriting all three, had spent 38 years loved beyond question, and slowly, quietly, without any malice on anyone's part, running out of room to be herself. I closed the notepad. I looked at the clock. 5:47 a.m. I did not call Renee. Instead, I opened my laptop and began to write back. The hardest scene is next. 2 women at a kitchen table, and the 4 words that changed everything. You're right, I'm sorry. No but, no because, no explanation. Just those 4 words, and what happened after. I flew back to Seattle on a Thursday, not as a surprise. I called David the night before, not Renee, David, and I said, I'd like to come back. One day. I'm not coming to stay and I'm not bringing anything. I just want to talk to her, face to face. David was quiet for a moment. Let me ask her. He called back 40 minutes later. She said okay. That was all. Just okay. I had not expected more and I was grateful for what I got. I landed at SeaTac at 11:15 Friday morning and took the light rail into the city because I had always driven straight from the airport to Renee's house before. Always rented a car so I would have independence and flexibility and the ability to run errands for her if needed. And this time I did not want to arrive with any of that. No rental car, no errands, no flexibility built in for extending the visit if I decided she needed me longer than planned. Just the light rail, and then a cab, and then her front door. David opened it. He shook my hand, which is not something he had done before. We were huggers, our family, had always been. But this handshake felt more respectful than the hug would have somehow. Like he was meeting me as something other than just Renee's mother for the first time. She's in the kitchen, he said. Jasmine's at school. I'm going to go work in the office. He was giving us the house. Thank you, David, I said. He nodded and walked down the hallway, and I went to the kitchen. Renee was standing at the counter with her back to me, doing something with the coffee maker that probably didn't need doing. She was buying herself 10 seconds. I recognized the move because I do it myself, the unnecessary task that gives you a moment to collect yourself before you have to turn around and face the thing you've been dreading and wanting in equal measure. I sat down at the kitchen table without being invited to, not in a claiming way, not the way I used to walk into rooms and immediately begin assessing what needed rearranging, just sitting down, putting myself at the lower position, waiting. She turned around. She had 2 mugs. She set one in front of me and sat down across the table with the other, and we looked at each other in the particular way of people who have known each other their entire lives and are somehow only now making direct eye contact. She looked tired, not in the way David had meant when he said she wasn't sleeping, a different kind of tired, the kind that comes from carrying something for a long time and not putting it down. I thought about how long she had been carrying it. I read your email, I said. I know. I read it 4 times. She wrapped both hands around her mug. Mom, can I ask you one thing before anything else? A pause. What? Your favorite color. Navy blue, since you were 16. I kept my eyes on her. Tell me why. She stared at me. I understood what she was looking for. She was looking for the catch, for the moment when this became about something else, for the turn in the conversation where I would pivot from asking to explaining, from listening to managing. She had been waiting for that turn her whole life, and she had learned, with the patience of someone who has been disappointed consistently, to see it coming from a long way off. I kept my hands around my own mug. I did not have a notepad. I did not have a follow-up point prepared. I had nothing except the question and whatever she chose to do with it. The silence lasted long enough that I heard the refrigerator hum. Then Renee said, Because it doesn't ask anything of you. I waited. Yellow wants you to feel a certain way. It's cheerful. It insists on it. Navy blue just is. It's just there. It doesn't need you to perform anything back at it. She looked at her mug. I was 16 and I just wanted a room that didn't need anything from me. I took a breath. And I brought home yellow, I said. You brought home yellow. Because I thought cheerful was what you needed. I know you did. I didn't ask. No. The word landed quietly. Not as an accusation. Renee said it the way you state a fact that you've made peace with mostly, but that still has some weight to it when you pick it up. Tell me more, I said. Whatever else you need to say. I'm going to sit here, and I'm going to listen, and I am not going to explain anything. She looked at me for a long time. I could see her deciding. I could see the part of her that had written 6 pages at 1 a.m. doing battle with the part of her that had spent 38 years protecting me from the consequences of my own love. The dorm room, she said finally. Yes. It wasn't just the rearranging, it was I had put things exactly where I wanted them. I'd thought about it for weeks, where my desk would go, which wall I'd put my photos on. It was the first space that was ever going to be completely mine, and I had a plan for it, and I came back and the plan was gone. I thought it looked better by the window, more light. Mom, I know, I'm sorry. Keep going. She kept going. She talked for 40 minutes, not all at once. It came in the way things come when they've been held in for a long time. Not a flood, but a series of waves, each one arriving after the last one had receded enough to make room. She talked about the wedding photographer's list and the 10 days after Jasmine was born and the Georgia Tech decision and the piano. She talked about the Sunday calls and why she kept them to 23 minutes and how guilty she felt about that, how she'd told herself it wasn't a real problem, that plenty of daughters didn't call their mothers at all, and she was better than that. But underneath the guilt was something she'd had more trouble admitting. I love talking to you, Mom. I want you to know that. But I haven't told you a true thing in years, because every true thing I tell you becomes a project, and I'm so tired of being your project. I felt that in my back teeth. What do you mean? I asked, carefully, not defensively, or I tried not to be defensive. I was watching myself the way you watch yourself on a slippery floor, conscious of every placement. When David and I were thinking about moving to Portland, 2 years ago, we almost moved. I didn't tell you we were considering it because I knew what would happen. You'd have opinions about neighborhoods. You'd have done research. You'd have sent me listings. You'd have called the realtor I chose and given her additional instructions. A pause. And the thing is, those are all things you do because you love me. I know that. But I can't tell you the real things because the real things become yours. You take them over, and then they don't feel real anymore. Like I colonized them, I said. She looked at me, surprised. Gloria said something like that to me, that I fill every room. I looked down at the table. I've been thinking about it since. Yeah, that's what it feels like. And Jasmine, her expression changed, softer and harder at the same time. She switches her crayons. I know you know. I told you in the email. She was using orange and she switched to red. She's been doing it for 2 years. I closed my eyes for a moment. My granddaughter, 9 years old, already managing the adults in her life, already performing the correct version of herself for the person in the room, already, learning to put away the bright orange and pick up something more acceptable. She was learning it from Renee, and Renee had learned it from me, and I had learned it from Dorothy, and Dorothy had learned it from Celestine, who had learned it from a world that gave her no other choice. 4 generations. And somewhere in this kitchen, in this conversation, on this ordinary Friday morning in Seattle, it had to stop. When Renee finished, the kitchen was very quiet. I had not interrupted once. I want to say that clearly because it cost me something. Every time she said a thing I wanted to contextualize, every time she described a moment that I remembered differently, every time she named something I had done with love and showed me the underside of it, I felt the explanation forming in my chest like a reflex, like a sneeze I was suppressing, and I held it and let her keep talking. When she was done, she was looking at the table. I waited until I was sure she was done. Not the pause before more kind of done. The done kind, the kind where the room changes slightly because something has been released into it. Renee, I said. She looked up. You're right, she went very still. About the dorm room, about the wedding photos, about the 10 days and the piano and the Portland listings you never sent me because you already knew what I would do with them. I kept my eyes on hers. About Jasmine, about all of it. You're right. She opened her mouth. And I'm sorry. The kitchen was so quiet I could hear the coffee maker finishing its cycle. I watched my daughter's face move through something I had never seen on it before. Not relief exactly, not happiness exactly. Something more fundamental than either of those things. The expression of someone who has been bracing against a wall for a very long time and has just felt the wall shift. Mom, don't, I said gently. Don't comfort me right now, baby. I know it's your instinct. It's mine too. But I need to sit in this for a minute. I put my hands flat on the table. I have been sitting and being right my whole life. Let me try sitting and being wrong. Just for a minute. The silence that followed was different from the silences before it. Those silences had been careful, watchful, full of the particular tension of people who are protecting themselves and each other at the same time. This silence was the other kind, the kind that isn't empty, the kind that has something in it. Not resolution, not yet, but the first true stillness we'd found in years, maybe ever, the stillness of two people who have stopped performing and are simply in the same room together. Renee started crying, not the controlled kind, not the kind you do when you're deciding whether to cry, managing it as it happens. The helpless kind, the kind that arrives before you've given it permission, that comes from somewhere below the place where you make decisions. I did not move to fix it. I did not hand her a tissue or rub her back or say it's okay, it's all okay. I sat across the table from my daughter and I let her cry, and I cried too, quietly, and we stayed there together in it. I became Dorothy, I said when we'd both been quiet for a little while. I swore I wouldn't. That was the one thing I was sure about, and I became her anyway. You're not Dorothy, Mom. Renee, you're not. Dorothy never would have come back. Dorothy never would have sat here and... She stopped, pressed her fingers to her eyes. Dorothy never asked. I should have asked 30 years ago. Maybe, but you're asking now. We sat with that. Outside, somewhere down the street, someone was mowing a lawn. An ordinary neighborly sound, a Friday sound, the sound of a city going about its business, while two women sat in a kitchen and tried to find their way to each other across 38 years of love that had sometimes looked more like occupation than invitation. I don't know how to do it differently, I said finally. I want you to know that I understand that wanting isn't enough, but I want to. I know, I'm going to get it wrong sometimes. I know that too. Will you tell me? When I do? She looked at me for a long moment. This was not a small thing I was asking. I understood that. I was asking her to take on work she had been avoiding her whole life. The work of telling me the true thing instead of the managed thing, knowing it would require her to trust that this time I would receive it differently. I'll try, she said, if you'll actually listen. I'll actually listen. You're going to want to fix it. I know. You have to not fix it. I know. Just let it be the thing it is. Don't make it into a project. Okay, she said, and then she reached across the kitchen table and put her hand over mine. I flew home the next morning. I want to say I stayed. I want to tell you there was a long weekend of slow breakfasts and walks in the neighborhood, and Jasmine showing me her drawings. That would make a better story, probably. More warmth, more obvious resolution. But staying would have been the old thing. The Yvonne who arrives with gumbo thing. The filling up the room thing. The new thing was leaving. The new thing was trusting that what had happened in that kitchen was real and did not need to be reinforced with 4 more days of my presence. That Renee and David and Jasmine would have their Friday evening and their Saturday morning and their regular weekend without me in the middle of it. And that this, the ordinary weekend without me in it, was part of how we were going to be different. I hugged Renee goodbye at the door. She held on for a moment longer than usual and then let go. Call me Sunday, she said. What do you want to talk about? I asked. She blinked. What? Sunday. What do you want to talk about? Tell me now so I know what to ask about. Something moved across her face, something small and surprised, and I thought a little hopeful. I've been reading this book about sustainable architecture. It's kind of... I don't know if you'd find it interesting. Tell me the title. I'll get a copy so I know what you're talking about. She told me the title. She was smiling when she said it. Not the careful smile, not the managing smile. The real one. The one I had seen in photographs from years she was away from me. Okay, she said. Sunday. The months that followed were not a transformation. I want to be careful about that word, because transformation implies a clean before and after, a moment of change so complete that the old version of yourself dissolves and something new steps forward. That is not what happened. What happened was smaller and harder and more interesting than transformation. Week 1. Renee called Sunday and talked for 41 minutes about the architecture book. I listened. I asked one question about a thing she mentioned. Passive cooling systems, a concept I had genuinely never thought about. And she spent 6 minutes explaining it to me. And somewhere in those 6 minutes she started talking faster, the way people do when they realize they have an actual audience, and I thought, this is what I've been missing. This is who she is when there's room. Week 3. I caught myself on the phone, starting to say, "You know what you should do," and I stopped. Mid-sentence. Said, "Sorry, I was about to give advice you didn't ask for. What do you think you should do?" The silence on her end lasted 5 seconds. Then she laughed, a real surprised laugh. "Mom, did you just stop yourself?" "I did." "Okay, that's okay. Yeah. I'm going to keep doing that, stopping myself. It might be awkward." "That's okay," she said, and I could hear in her voice that she meant it. Week 6. I found Dorothy's journals. I had been slowly going through boxes in my storage room, a project I had been putting off for years, the accumulated archaeology of a 64-year life. And on a Sunday afternoon in November, I found a box I didn't recognize, taped shut, labeled in my mother's handwriting. D.W. Personal, Dorothy Washington, her maiden name. I sat on the storage room floor for a long time before I opened it. Inside, 3 spiral notebooks, the kind you get at the drugstore, filled with Dorothy's small, careful handwriting. I took them to the kitchen table and I opened the first one. She had started it the year I was 34, the year I told her this is my apartment, not yours, and she picked up her purse and walked out. "Yvonne told me to leave today," the first entry read. "I rearranged her furniture. I brought her curtains. I thought she would like the curtains, yellow with a small print, very cheerful. She didn't like them. She said, 'This is my apartment, not yours.' I know it's her apartment. I only wanted it to feel like home to her. I came home on the bus and I sat in the kitchen and I thought, I've lost her. Not today. Today was just a day. But I've been losing her for a long time and I only just now understood it. She needs something from me that I don't know how to give. I can cook, and I can clean, and I can show up with curtains, and I can work 2 jobs to pay for her school, and I can be there every single time she needs me. But she needs something else. I don't know what it is. My mother never taught it to me. I only know how to love people by taking care of them. If that's not what they need, I don't know what to do." I sat at my kitchen table in Atlanta, holding my dead mother's journal, and I read that paragraph 4 times. I only know how to love people by taking care of them. If that's not what they need, I don't know what to do. 64 years old, and I had never known my mother had written this. Had never known she had sat in her kitchen the same night I stood in my rearranged living room feeling righteous. And she had known. She had understood in her own way that something was broken. She just didn't have the tools to fix it. None of us had the tools. We kept handing down the broken ones. I closed the journal and I sat there for a long time and I let myself feel something I had not expected to feel. Not just grief, but something adjacent to forgiveness. Not forgiveness for the specific things, the curtains, the comparisons, the years of your cousin Patricia, but something larger. A releasing of the story I had been telling about Dorothy, the story where she was the source of the wound, and I was the one who had escaped it. I had not escaped it. I had carried it forward, in different clothes, with warmer hands and louder love, and handed it to Renee. And Renee, my brilliant, patient, navy blue-loving daughter, was choosing not to hand it to Jasmine. That choice had started in a kitchen on a Friday morning in Seattle with one question. "You're right, and I'm sorry." 4 words. No but, no because. 4 words that Dorothy had never been given the tools to say. 4 words that Celestine had never lived in a world that offered her. 4 words that I had nearly spent my whole life without saying. In November, Jasmine called me herself, not with Renee in the background, not prompted by anyone. She called from her tablet at 7 in the evening, her face filling the screen, a little blurry because she was holding it too close. "Grandma, I made something. Can I show you?" "Show me," I said. She flipped the camera around. A drawing on her desk. A house with a bright orange roof, an improbably purple sky, grass in a blue-green shade that doesn't exist in nature and is exactly right. "What do you think?" she asked. I looked at it for a long time. The orange roof, the purple sky, the blue-green grass. A picture of the world as a 9-year-old sees it when no one has told her yet that she's seeing it wrong. "I think," I said slowly, "that it looks exactly like the way you see the world. And I love that." The camera flipped back to her face. Her eyes went wide. "You really like it?" "I really like it." "Mommy said you would, but I wasn't sure." "Jasmine?" "Yeah?" "What's your favorite color?" She grinned, the unguarded kind, the kind you can't manufacture. "Bright orange, like really, really bright orange, like almost hurts your eyes orange. That is a great color, I said. Grandma, can I call you next week and show you my next drawing? You can call me anytime, baby. I'll be right here, and I'll just look. She said goodbye and ended the call, and I sat in my living room in the particular silence that follows a conversation that mattered. I'll just look. Not I'll tell you what I think. Not I'll show you how to make the house more realistic. Not let Grandma help. Just I'll look. It was the smallest sentence I had ever said to her. It was the most important one. On Christmas Eve, I sat alone in my Atlanta living room. This was a choice, not a circumstance. Renee and David had invited me to Portland. They'd moved there in October, a decision I had heard about on a Sunday call and responded to with, "What do you and David think is best?" And then actually waited through the silence until Renee told me. I offered not to come for Christmas. I said it plainly. I know you're in a new house. I know you need to build your own traditions in it. I'll come in February instead if you want. The silence on the phone had lasted long enough that I almost filled it. I didn't. Mom, Renee said finally, that might be the most loving thing you've ever said to me. So I sat alone on Christmas Eve, and I wrote a letter to Dorothy. I know she couldn't read it. I know it's the kind of thing that is for the writer more than the recipient, and I am at peace with that. Mom, I found your journals last month. I read all 3 of them. I need you to know that. You knew. You knew something was wrong between us, and you didn't know how to fix it, and you sat in your kitchen alone with that knowing for years. I didn't understand that until I read your words. I thought you were someone things simply didn't penetrate. I was wrong about that. I understand now what Celestine gave you, and what you gave me, and what I gave Renee. I understand that none of us were careless. We were all so careful. We were so careful and so full of love, and we were working with what we had, which was broken, which was the only thing any of us had ever been given. But Renee is building new tools. She's doing it on purpose, with intention, in a new house in Portland with a husband who notices when their daughter switches crayons. And Jasmine, your great-granddaughter Mom, she has Robert's eyes and she loves bright orange. Jasmine is going to grow up in a house where someone asks her what she wants and then waits for the answer. She will never have to manage the adults around her. She will never have to switch her crayons. I think that's enough. I think that's more than enough. I think that's everything, actually. I love you. I understand you. I'm still learning to forgive the parts I'm still angry about, and I think you would respect that more than easy forgiveness anyway. You were never a woman who wanted things that weren't earned. Your daughter, Yvonne. At 10 o'clock, the phone rang. Hey, Mom. Renee's voice. Easy, unprompted. Nothing underneath it except what it was. Hey, baby. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas. A pause. Comfortable, not loaded. Jasmine made you an ornament. She's been working on it for 2 weeks. She made me promise not to tell you what color it is. I laughed. Let me guess. Don't guess. Let her show you. Okay. Mom, next year. If you want to come, just come. Don't plan anything. Don't bring a project. Just pack a bag and come and be here. I put my hand on my chest. I'd like that, I said. I'd really like that. 3 generations of women who loved each other as hard as they could with the tools they had been given. Celestine, who was never allowed to take up space, and so took up all of her children's. Dorothy, who was never given comfort, and so never learned to offer it. Me, Yvonne, who swore I would be different and was, in all the ways I could see, and wasn't, in the one way that mattered most. And Renee, who sat across a kitchen table on a Friday morning and said the true things and waited and was finally, after 38 years, heard. The cycle does not end on its own. Someone has to choose to end it. Renee opened her mouth. I finally listened. Jasmine will never have to choose. If this story found something in you, if you recognized a room you've been filling, or a truth you've been managing, or a color you switched to because it was easier than explaining the one you wanted, I hope you'll carry it with you. It is never too late to ask. It is never too late to listen. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is leave a little space empty and let someone else decide what belongs there. Thank you for staying with me until the end.